Welcome, everybody, to the first edition of Lunar Denizens, a welcoming party. My name is Nick Travellini. I am a member of the New School Policy and Design for Outer Space, a club at the New School and a part of the Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, SEDS, international organization. And we are very grateful to welcome and co-organize this event with very, very far away and the Santa Fe Institute's InterPlanetary project. And to get us started, I'll go ahead and introduce our primary facilitators today, Citraka and Andrew, who are with very, very far away. And the participants today who have graciously donated their time and talent to this event. Stephanie Sherman, Simone Rebodego, I think I got that right, and Han Benaroa. So thank you all for participating. And in order to sort of set out the table, what I'm going to do is provide a little bit of background about this event. So Lunar Denizens series is coming out of a previous event that the New School Policy and Design for Outer Space had organized called Human Considerations. And the idea of that event was to create a sort of speculative space for us as an organization to try to address the guiding question and theme of the Venice Architecture Biennale this year, which is the question, and for the first time ever, it is a question, how will we live together? And so what we did was we created a speculative lunar base in the early decades of the 22nd century, and a sort of background historical account of how we got to establishing a lunar base in the 22nd century through the course of the 21st century. And part of the story coming out of that was that prior attempts to establish off-world bases had failed due to basically an overemphasis on the technical considerations and not taking into account the socio-cultural considerations of life off-world, at least sufficiently. And what this panel, the Human Considerations panel, was a convening of experts by the speculative global union to begin to try to address these questions and provide the sort of answers that they needed in order to properly support a lunar base. And the Lunar Denizens series is continuing that conversation. And I really want to thank everybody who is participating in the series, both now and will continue to participate in the future iterations of it, for doing so and helping us build out the future world of the 22nd century in Mare Nectar space. And with that, please take a look at some of the resources that have been posted in the chat if you'd like additional details. But I'll turn it over to Citraka. The floor is yours.
Hello, thanks, Nick. Hello, everyone. And normal. Okay, that's better. I've been censored. Yeah, so no, well, thank you very much for joining us. And I can see that there's like a couple of names, a couple of people were there already last time. So thanks for joining us again. Yeah, feel free to participate in the conversation within the chat and everything. So this is going to be as Nick said, this is going to be our second trip to Mare Nectaris. If you missed the first one, there's the link in the chat as well with the full event recorded. And it's on the NSPDOS YouTube channel. Like, this recording will live as well on the NSPDOS YouTube channel. So I would encourage everyone to go there and subscribe or like once you're at it, because all the future event as well will be living on the NSPDOS YouTube channel as well. So just to give a recap on the first event that we sort of, that Nick was talking about, so the human consideration. Just to give you a general recap of what happened. So the first event was some sort of opening attempt at imagining kind of long-term moon dwelling. And we had with us three amazing, brilliant interdisciplinary thinkers. We had Professor Fred Sharman, Dr. Tamara Alvarez, and Professor DeWitt Kilgore. And if you're not familiar with their work, I would definitely recommend you to check them out, because they've been their work and writings have been like a massive kind of like source of inspiration for these events, and also for the work that we do with very, very far away. But I'll touch upon that a little bit later. So I'm just going to give you a quick introduction first before introducing the guests as well for today. But together with Fred, Tamara, and DeWitt, we also looked at what it would take to create a successful permanent settlement from a human experience perspective. And as Nick said, kind of exploring the more communal aspect of space settlement. And ultimately what we try to do as well is just to explore the broader question that is, what does human presence on the moon actually mean? And we did that through examining three distinct moments over a 3-hour-long conversation. And the first one was the welcoming party, or what happens when you first set foot on Mare Nectaris. Then we sort of tried to imagine a sort of daily routine, or lunar daily routine with the needs and duties that this may require from each of the settlers. And eventually, we also looked into what happens when it's time to head back to Earth, or the broader relationship between Earth and the moon. And but despite having spent this time kind of imagining the settlements and discussing potential issues and ideas, we were still quite abstract, and we sort of only painted a picture with broad strokes, highlighting potentials and multiple plausible scenarios. So following the event, we thought that it would be actually a great idea to revisit these three moments and delve a little deeper into each of those, bouncing off or kind of like iterating on situations and ideas captured during the previous journey. So here we are now doing the welcoming party again. So as you've guessed, and so have we as we discussed as well, Lunar Denizens is a first part of a welcoming party, sorry, is the first of a 3-part series of design sprints. And I just wanted to add the fact that we are super lucky to be co-hosting this with, obviously, NSPDOS, but also the Santa Fe Institute interdisciplinary InterPlanetary projects. And I wanted to take actually the opportunity here to actually thank Caitlin McShear, who's the director of the InterPlanetary project, and who gave us like access to a network of brilliant people and was really key in the preparation of this particular event. So thank you very much for that. Now, before we jump into planning this current welcoming party and introducing our guest panelists, I wanted to give another recap, but like the recap of the themes and things that we discussed during the previous event, and also obviously relating to the welcoming party. So previously on Mare Nectaris, so we talked a bit about how the welcoming party was an important factor in shaping the first impression, like that this could be the opportunity to characterize the settlement through rituals, introductions and inductions, and show the new settlers what Mare Nectaris as a community is about, and as much as it is a moment of transition and adaptation. So transition for a tight-knit community being reshaped and influenced by the arrival and the departures of members of the community, and adaptation for the newcomers, as we can sort of imagine the crazy amount of new stuff and new protocols that you may need to familiarize yourself with when you land on Mare Nectaris, starting from kind of pure community and individual guidelines to ensure collective safety, perhaps all the way to resources management, regulations, as well as getting used to the gravity, perhaps, and all the things in between as well. So in a way, the intent and design of a welcoming party could be an opportunity to sort of like affirm and manufacture a sense of local culture, a sense of community. And this led us to think of this welcoming party as something to set the scene for the charting of what actually Fred Sharman referred to as an extended version of the planetary protection. So extending a set of guiding principles and protocols to prevent biological contamination from occurring in during interplanetary missions to more abstract constructs and particular ethical stances, perhaps, like aiming at preventing colonial mindsets, for instance, or preventing from viewing the lunar environment solely from an utilitarian perspective, et cetera, et cetera. So for lack of better terms, it's a sort of code of conduct baked into safety protocols or something of this nature. And the final thing I'd like to highlight from the previous conversation is also thinking of or imagining the historical precedents and how things may have evolved from the original premise, which I think is an important thing to keep in mind, as it may impact the character of the settlement itself, like whether it started as a military base or it might have started as a tourist resort, etc., which by nature would inform the narratives that led to the conceptualization of the built environment, like small fragmented capsules versus big domes and common areas, etc., as much as it would have informed our relationship to the lunar landscape, like a place to be exploited or nature to be preserved, etc., etc. Obviously, we discussed a lot more things, and this is only like, I guess, my takeaway, but I think these could be interesting considerations from which we can spawn new ideas that may reinforce or like actually surcease certain things that we discussed previously. But in any case, the aim is to take a closer or perhaps a more detailed look at these things, as these events are, at least personally, an opportunity to create a shared library of knowledge, a shared lexicon of ideas, to encourage new types of conversation and unusual narratives that could be manifested through spawning more of this type of creative collaboration. Now, what we're going to try to do today is a couple of things, such as imagine and describe a built environment that captures the culture and the social dynamics of this community. And we are addressing the built environment at multiple scales, so from architectural / urban planning level, all the way to perhaps administrative services and even documents, et cetera, et cetera. And then we could think about how these manifested things shaping the kind of socio-cultural identity may shape power relations or give rise to another economic or legal kind of realities. And another way or simpler way to put it is like, let's together imagine some objects, structures, protocols, system, rituals, etc., and start building and compile a catalog of lunar things that are yet to be imagined. Another important thing, although it may not sound like it is, but these things do not need to emanate from a single scenario. So the things that you may come up with today could totally exist in contradictory realities, as this is perhaps more importantly what this speculative exercise may be about. It's kind of, first of all, about the manufacture of meaning and the subsequent narrative that are emerging from the design of these things. Now I'm going to stop talking now. And I would like the panelists to come forward and actually introduce themselves to tell us about your interest, expertise, domain of predilection, and perhaps your hope for this conversation. And so we have today with us, let's start with Stephanie Sherman.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks to Citraka, Andrew, and everyone for hosting and inviting me. And hello, all friends out there. Great to have you with us tonight or today, depending on where you are on the earth. So I'm Stephanie Sherman, and I'm a producer, writer, and designer, and I lead the Narrative Environments course at Central St. Martin's at University of Arts London. I formerly led the City Design Studio at Royal College of Art in collaboration with Julian Saravo of Autonomy UK, and I'm completing my PhD at UC San Diego, where I've been helping to lead the Center for Design and Geopolitics with Benjamin Bratton. And my research generally looks at prehistories of platform automation and how that shapes the pathologies and possibilities of autonomous mobility today and to come. And more broadly, I'm interested in kind of the feedback loops of stories and systems and strategies and how they affect one another. One aspect of my practice involves orchestrating and operating experimental communities and designing collaborative systems. And perhaps that's why Citraka invited me. Other than I have a cool microphone, and he does too, so that's fun. Recently, I've been thinking about culture less through the lens of expressions of human artifacts and more as a way of thinking and talking about behavior across networks. So between human and all sorts of inhuman and machine things, and thinking about how those networks are a function of flows and outlets and inputs, et cetera. And I guess, other interests that I bring to the table, aside from automation and automobility, are affordances and hybrids, maintenance and management, robots and bots as psychological and physical support systems and agents, company towns, interfaces and mediation, infrastructure as unconscious, collective prosthetics, sex, care, post-family, deep work, leisure, and the implications for mobility as a fundamental life condition rather than an exception. And finally, I guess the hopes for the conversation today is to really build on what we learned from the groundwork so generously established by Fred, Tamara, and DeWitt last time. I'm excited to learn more about the physics of the moon, because admittedly, I know very little about the moon, save for the fact that it affects my menstrual cycles and it prevents me from sleeping at night. Although I've done my best to read up as much as I can for today. And I'm really excited to get as specific as we can about anything, because as I was talking about with Citraka, the details are really interesting and exciting in terms of settlements. So thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. That was pretty good. The next, let's have Professor Haim Benaroya. Hello.
Thanks, Citraka. Andrew, thank you for organizing this, and want to thank Caitlin of the Santa Fe Institute for having me invited for this. I really look forward to this. My background is engineering. I worked as a consulting engineer for 8 years in New York, and then joined Rutgers University, Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. My interests are engineering structures, but also defining environments that we design for. And very early on, I became interested in lunar habitats and wanted to just figure out how can I do more and impact that field. And so for the last several decades, I've been looking at different concepts of lunar habitats, initially almost solely from the engineering perspective, but eventually getting more interested in all the other aspects, because we can't just design a structure clearly and not worry about all the other aspects. And in many ways, a lot of the secondary aspects of creating a habitat on the moon are not engineering oriented. They're more physiological issues, psychological issues, creating an environment that humans feel comfortable in. And so I became more interested in that. And I also started thinking about just how do we finance something like this? You know, certainly we can ask the taxpayer to pay for the whole thing, as has been the case until today almost. But eventually these habitats have to create new economies, and just they have to be their own. They have to satisfy the needs that they create almost. So it's creating the socioeconomic infrastructure for survival, and within that a place where humans can feel comfortable. So I've been looking at these different aspects, and so this venue here is really very exciting for me to be a part of, because it talks about the lunar habitat as a whole rather than as a purely engineering construct. So again, I am glad to be here, and I very much look forward to this conversation.
Thank you very much. I mean, we're very happy you're here. So, and the last person will be, or the last guest, sorry, would be Simone Rabodengo. Hi, Simone.
Hi, hello everyone. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and I'm really looking forward to see where we're gonna end in this future. So I'm Simone. I'm Italian. I would say I'm a product and interaction design. But most of the things that I do are products that kind of live in that in-between of the present and the future. So sometimes they're very fictional, sometimes they become real, but you never know. I'm a partner at Oyo Studio, which is a studio based in London and Belgrade. And we basically design future product and interaction for big companies, but also for museums and institutions around the world. I'm also teaching. I'm a visiting faculty at the Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design, where I push students to imagine kind of future living with autonomous being and kind of small things like Roombas, but also robots, and basically this real new world that we will have with more than human living around us. And in that sense, also I cannot say that I'm an author, but I wrote a book with future fables called Everything is Someone, that basically talks about this new society where things become people, people become things, and then everything in between. And around this topic, I actually have been, for the last 3 years, I've been immersed in a gigantic fiction, which is the Museum of the Future. And I've been collaborating with people from Jet Propulsion Lab and from other very nice design fiction studios, like the Near Future Laboratory to create, probably is going to be the biggest immersive fiction of life in space. We were just in 2070, so now I have to imagine again 50 years in the future. But we've been sort of designing, you know, all those professions, the artifacts, the rituals of life in orbit and not on the moon. So I'm really interested. I mean, a lot of my practice and what I also hopefully will bring here. I'm really interested in the mundanity of future, like the little things, appliances, tickets, documents, things that break. Problems. So I really like all these kind of questions, like, you know, what will someone forget in their pocket when they go to space, and is that going to be a problem? You know, or is someone going to have the ability to have a cigarette break? Maybe not in 100 years we will not have cigarettes, but who knows? There'll be something else. So I really like somehow to imagine the details of the future, because those are the things that are going to make it more real and also make it easier for all of us to imagine ourselves in it. And yeah, so I'm really, really keen to start jamming about this welcome party and all the nitty-gritty, nice and problematic things that will happen.
That's great. Yes, I like that. I haven't thought about it as jamming, but it is very much what it is. I like that. Well, thank you very much. We're just going to finish this round of intros by with the quick words on VVFA, or very, very far away. So my name is Citraka Rakotoniena, and I'm representing half of the very, very far away, or VVFA crew. The other half is Andrew Friend, who's on your screen as well. And he'll also be facilitating this conversation. So we both artists and designers and lecturers based in London. And VVFA is a project that we started in 2015 as a series of public-facing, world-building co-inquiries, which uses space exploration as a lens and design as an exploratory tool to reimagine futures on and off planet. And we do so by creating a sort of entanglement of narratives, starting from the very small and peculiar all the way to the kind of bigger global picture. And we sort of have a bottom-up approach to world building. And we've been using this approach as a way of thinking critically and reflecting on the present status quo. And also we use fiction as a method to examine our current prejudices and attitudes towards the future in general. Andrew, do you want to add anything?
Hold on a second. No, I think that sums it up quite nicely. Yeah.
So should we get
started? I think we wanted to start off by recapping on the kind of brief for today's session that we created. So I'll just run through that, and then we can start, as Simone puts it, the jam. So, okay, so the location is Mare Nectaris on the moon. Population 150 to 200 people. It's a permanent settlement. Welcoming parties and rituals are of paramount importance at Mare Nectaris. Throughout its lifespan, the base has hosted hundreds of inhabitants on periodic rotations. As newcomers arrive, older settlers are sent away never to return. This, in turn, engages a series of protocols and preparations to welcome the new members, provide guidance and accommodate needs until the transition is complete and trivial moon life resumes. The assignment for today's session is to organize and imagine what the integration of new community members entails, from the very practical and perhaps bureaucratic through to the emotional and potential shifts in dynamics. What could this changeover mean for settlers? What goodie bags and welcome kits are the new arrivals gifted with? What's their first day like? What's their first night like? Have they got time to admire the Earth's crescent? Are they sent to quarantine and follow isolation protocols for the first few days? Did they bring presents? Do the settlers have any say on who's joining their community, or is it a complete surprise each time? And conversely, for leaving members, what does it mean to leave a tight-knit community? How does this affect the current settlers and the community dynamics? Did they choose to leave? Can they choose to stay? Are they voted out? What do they leave behind and what are they taking away? These are just some starting points for the kind of thoughts that we've been having when we've been discussing this up to this point. What we want to be doing today is starting to think about describing the objects, the rituals, the things and their situations, spaces, times before, during, or after the changeover. This might take the form of micro-narratives or may need the imagining of new artifacts, structures, functions, protocols. The idea is that we kind of come up with an archive or a list of things that could be relevant to these permanent settlers. And we created a series of party cards that we invite our kind of panel to use, but also anybody in the call, in the whole session here to join in and interact with the session through that. I think Citraka is going to put the link to these in the chat now. And it's just a large Google Doc, and you can just start to add things to it as you see fit, or if you think of anything. So we're all kind of sharing stuff as we go.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so yeah, the party card, feel free, if you feel inspired, just type things in. I think that could be quite cool to have this kind of big collection of things. And also, okay, so similarly to the way we organized the conversation like last time, so the human consideration, we've split this welcoming party into a couple moments as well, from which we can hopefully build different scenarios. And again, we've plotted a loose roadmap to be used as a prompt, but feel free, again, to take this conversation wherever you think is relevant, really. So the first moment we want you to look into is called When the Airlock Opens. You've been waiting for this moment for months and are excited to take your first step on Mare Nectaris, after what probably was the longest journey you've ever experienced. Your lander has docked, you're patiently waiting as the crew outside seem to go through safety measures. You're looking through the window to catch a glimpse of the settlement. Suddenly you hear the sound of air rushing into your cabin. The airlock opens. What do you see? I don't know who wants to start.
So I guess coming into the facility, I sort of envision a tunnel, right? Like a long tube coming in, and probably they make sure that we're not bringing in any bacteria or other things that we want to keep away from the base or the facility. I can imagine just maybe going through a little bit of a medical checkup, just as a practical matter, and maybe just like in an international arrivals building, maybe there's a glass wall where people are standing there waving at us and welcoming us to the facility, and then I assume that we don't have to do a luggage pickup, like at an airport. I hope that will be a little bit more straightforward than that. But I see a lot of these little practical things to get behind, to get through, just like arriving in any new facility.
For
Yeah,
2 minutes, sorry.
Yeah, no, because I also was imagining a tunnel for some reason, but I was gonna go for the super cheesy version of then a bit like an aquarium that you can finally see the moon, but you cannot get out. And I don't know, for me, like the first thing I was thinking is like, I would be also wanted to do the first step, like, this is a small step for a man. And I think I almost think there should be a very cheesy moment where everyone does this bigger step, because it's probably the first step you do in microgravity. So I can imagine that as you get out, it's almost like you have this like placemat that allows you to do this, this bigger step. And it's kind of like the very cheesy version of a Neil Armstrong foot. And I don't know, because I almost imagine a bit because at this point, a lot of people travel to space. So some of this kind of cheesiness of rituals is almost becoming too much. But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of imagining that this tunnel could be, at least I can simulate that I'm walking on the moon even though I'm not ready yet. I don't know. I was actually the question: are you gonna be in clothes or in a EVA suit? I mean, is it because I don't know. Every time when in every sort of like arrival moment, in this case, if we dock on a very technical space, or more of this sort of like, as you said also, Haim, like more of the arrival airport. So I guess it will depend a bit where we actually dock, whether it's very technical and I can imagine that scenario where it's going to be really like, scanning and everything, or if it's more like airport and more kind of ceremonial and choreographed arrival where, you do the first step, then you see the moon, the scenario, and then you enter in this space where probably you're going to get the first sort of, sensorial experience of the moon.
Yeah, I wonder if perhaps that landing takes place a safe distance from the actual base, so you have to travel from where you've landed to the actual facility, if you like. And then like when you say, Simone, the idea that you kind of start moving and bouncing as soon as you land there, I just think of if I've been on like a long car journey and you kind of stumble out of the car and you kind of stretch your legs a bit. I don't know if I'd be bouncing or kind of tumbling out of my seat. It's an interesting kind of thought of what that tumble might be, and especially when you think about the physics of being on the moon, which Stephanie has said. You said something that you're interested in kind of looking at during today's session.
Well, I've been thinking a lot to this point about sort of the mood of arrival based on the journey. So I guess currently it takes 3 days to get there, approximately. So I've been thinking about, what goes on during those 3 days and how that contributes to the spirit of the arrival. Like, was there kind of a curated TV channel sound journey? Was there like, did everyone watch independently, or was there also kind of collective or curated discussions that went on so that by the time our settlers arrive, they have already kind of outed with they know each other a little bit, and they are a unit.
Also, what snacks did you have in that trip? Like, if that's going to be very important. Like, because I don't know, there is this first example that I saw already, that there is now like the first champagne for 0G, or basically they created this first experience of like luxury champagne in 0G. So I can imagine that probably depending on who's flying there and why we're flying there, that the entertainment system of the flight and the snacks will definitely affect your mood when you get there. And yeah, I agree.
Do we need to quarantine? Chaim, maybe you know a little bit more about the kind of biological dynamics.
Just speculating, I would think that the people who are going to be going on this trip to the moon as settlers would be probably quarantining on Earth for a while before even taking the trip, not to have to quarantine at destination. And I would think also, as part of the preparation, people would go through some training, just knowing how the facility works, knowing emergency procedures, so that when they land and enter the facility, they're fairly well prepared, and may even already have been introduced, at least via this kind of mode, who's there, so that they're pretty much oriented to a lot of what they have to know and who they have to know.
There's a particular comment in the chat actually about the ISS, how we all have. This is something as well that we actually talked about a little bit in the previous event, which is this idea of like what kind of ceremony. Like, obviously, we all have these images of like astronauts arriving on the ISS and hugging each other, and also like the incentive, because often these are sort of international crew docking at the ISS, so it kind of gives incentive to everyone to come and actually welcome everyone, and also it's a small group of people. In this particular case, if we're thinking of a small community, but still quite like 150 to 200 inhabitants. The thing that I found quite interesting, and this is what this actual comment is referencing or talking about, is this like, do we still have the same kind of emotional connection to this kind of arrival of new people and etc., or is it something that eventually, as Simone was talking earlier about, was like kind of like fading off and disappearing, and basically that you've got these private company workers who are coming there and no one is there to actually welcome them behind that glass that Haim was talking about, and you're just welcomed by like hazmat suits who are like taking you, making sure that things are in order and etc. So like, yeah, just like, do you think like that welcome part or this particular ritual that you have at the beginning, is it almost like the thing that starts at the very beginning of the life of the base and eventually becomes something that is more of a tourist thing rather than a kind of like regular kind of ceremony or ritual?
I mean, I don't know, for me, I do imagine that becoming something more like almost like a touristy, because I think for the people arriving, of course, you need to have this moment that is choreographed in some way, and maybe there is a special welcoming. Actually, there is something we're also thinking. It's like, how do you combine this sort of you create a sort of lunar hospitality culture. What is that you get when you get there? I mean, before even you get a goodie bag, but do you get a particular drink because you've been dehydrated during a long flight, or is are you gonna try the first lunar water? And is there this sort of special moment where you arrive and it's like, okay, here is your first sip of lunar water, and by doing that, I'm actually also scanning for your microbiome and taking whatever and figuring out all your DNA and all your potential harmfulness for the ecosystem of the station. But I think I don't know, for me, I'm almost imagine all this security thing masked almost as a sort of ritual of moon welcoming, and in some way also in 100 years it could become a little bit more automated rather than people, because I can imagine that if there are, let's say, 20 people coming and 180 people there is probably 20 people going around. So I can imagine other people are busy doing things to run the village. Otherwise, there is sort of, because we were also talking about a calendar, maybe there is it's a day off when there is a new coming, it's basically like a national moon holiday. That is like, the newcomers, and then everyone has a free day, and so then it makes sense to have a party. So I think also, the calendar and the rhythm will change, because if there is no break for this, everyone will have to do their own stuff. I need to take care of the rover that is stuck in a crater, and that guy needs to fix his suit because it's kind of been pierced while going out on EVA. So
yeah, I think if we're talking about a facility with only a couple of hundred people, it's still relatively small and unique, even if it is 100 years in the future. I think the extreme environment that these people are living in, I think creates bonds between them. And now this new group of people is arriving, and one would think that sharing of this environment where everybody depends on everybody for their survival makes it a real bonding, a rapid bonding experience. The other thing I was curious about is, like, people are going to be coming from all over the world, right? So what is the language? Is there going to be a common language or an accepted language, or are people going to be expected to learn at least a core of several languages? So I'm curious about that as well.
We were talking before the recording started about Simone's accent filter. So I'm really excited for the mega translator earbuds that we're all gonna have with accent filters, so that there's a total mix up of like pinpointed origin on the arrival. But I've been yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually kind of, sorry, again, the chat is going very fast and my ability to read and talk is not the best. But there was a comment earlier, actually about like to your guys' points about this, like what kind of culture do you land in? And I think this also has a lot to do with the architecture itself of the environment. So if you land into something, that looks pretty much like a, I don't know, glass hospital kind of clinical kind of environment, or if you land into something that, I don't know, looks a little bit warmer, something like so how do you, I guess it's as much a question of just like which kind of culture do you arrive in as a kind of like that existed before, or are we trying to create, which I think is kind of an interesting question, is like how can we recreate or kind of try to manufacture a sort of like lunar culture through the structure itself or through the habitat itself and what you see in 3D around you? Or not? Or not?
No, yeah. I think because a lot of like, I think unfortunately, a lot of like sci-fi imagery runs in your head when you think about this, and also a lot of renders of visions of, moon settlements and, and I think also in the other discussion that, the dome being the ultimate space structure and basically having this big dome. But at the same time, the necessity of potentially having to be underground because of radiation. So maybe it won't be, but I mean, it would be great to have this amazing ceremonial effect where you kind of see somehow outside and you can see that you're on the moon. I mean, that would be, if I were to design an emotional journey for me to actually be excited about being there. I mean, I would probably be excited to be there, but you also need to choreograph the reaction, and then kind of, because there's going to be for sure some sort of psychological impact on you realizing that probably you need to stay 6 months in the environment with the same 200 people. So in some way I would love it to be like this big ceremonial space where maybe it's like buzzing of people, almost like a central piazza, where if you imagine, like, for instance, a Venetian sort of dock where you land the boat and then there is already a square and there is people doing something. It's maybe the central kind of system, the central square of the village. Then it makes sense for me to be a square where you can already see, oh, that's where I'm gonna go and get my my money exchange in whatever currency we have. Oh, here it's like, I'm gonna go and get my first snack. I don't know, for me a piazza with a port is sort of the best metaphor, because it's buzzing, it's active, rather than, for instance, an extremely ceremonial and official, because the other way around is that you arrive there and there is a keynote speaker waiting for you, and that would be such a bummer, that I flew 3 days and now I need to get this guy, which is like the lunar mayor, which is going to tell me everything that I already know. So I don't know, I would actually love myself to escape somewhere and get a snack rather than listening to a keynote.
So if it's okay, can I share a screen just to show some images of what people are thinking for lunar bases, and then we can sort of discuss it with that, just very quickly.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay. So I won't go through all of them, but I'll just go through them. Can you all see the screen? I guess you can, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see that first image is what Arthur C. Clarke 70 years ago thought the first lunar base is going to be, this egg-like structure. And then you have Baron Hilton, who wanted to have lunar bases for his Hilton hotels. And this is a 1990 image here of what a surface lunar hotel might look like. And next to that, you have a Marriott, and these are all surface structures. The different kinds of rover bases. A lot of the early bases will be very simple kinds of structures, like these cylinders. The initial ones are maybe for half a dozen people, but eventually, maybe we'll take craters and convert them into very large space of habitats. You can see this very large inflatable, and we all like inflatable structures because they create very large volumes and people have a large view. You know, we'll have greenhouses, and more recently, the discovery of lava tubes allow us to think about these large caverns underground that we can build very large facilities in. And this last one on the right, the bottom right, this is a Russian concept of huge habitats buried under the ground to provide shielding against radiation, thermal effects, but inside they're very large. If you imagine something like a big mall, you don't feel claustrophobic in a big mall, even though you're completely enclosed in it. So we have a lot of different possibilities, and probably the initial structure will be some cylindrical small thing for half a dozen or a dozen people. But I would guess within 40, 50 years after that, we're going to have large inflatable structures, large volumes, basically something that you know, one doesn't feel very claustrophobic. So I guess if we're talking a good amount of time in the future, I think we're going to see something that we're very comfortable to go as new settlers, you know, sort of pioneers.
These are really, I mean, thank you for sharing these slides, because no, these are very interesting kind of design proposal, but it's still very much, the thing that I quite like about them is like this very different sort of like configuration that we can imagine the place to be, and will definitely have a sort of impact on the way we relate to the lunar environment, because obviously in the lunar environment you have the built environment, which is the thing that is being artificially constructed in order to enable us to live there. But also you have on the other side of things like something that is more about the landscape itself, or the lunar landscape itself, and your relation to, in this particular case, lunar nature, I guess. I don't know, this is something that I mean, to go back a little bit to something that I eventually mentioned earlier, or Jaime, you actually talked a little bit about that as well, as you landing onto the place and the kind of like planetary protection thing in regard to this kind of built environment. Extending this planetary protection thing, not only looking at the safety thing, but like maybe incorporating, I don't know, moon etiquette, moon manners, in terms of like acclimatization to lower gravity, because it's maybe a conversation about facilities as well, in terms things that we eventually mentioned about being very wobbly when you arrive, and the acclimatization and getting used to the lower gravity, because then suddenly, if you have a lower gravity and actually it's not very efficient to walk around, but you actually keep on, as Andrew actually was mentioning the other day, just like if you actually keep on skipping around, would that actually have an influence as well on how you build the corridors or how you build the environment itself? Because yeah, or if you constantly slide around the corners as opposed to just walking, etc. It's a kind of it's almost like, what if we start thinking about the space from an inside-out perspective as well? Like, I don't know, just say.
Yeah, I was just thinking now that there should be a gradient of softness as you get in. Like, you know, the first tunnel is basically completely cushiony and like fluffy. And then as you start to, you know, you probably have to walk 100 meters and then to get to an actual solid ground, where then you realize, so because I think everything on orbital is kind of, you know, might be like softer. I mean, the ISS is completely non-soft, but I mean, if I imagine like, you know, the actual capsule that you're gonna travel into is probably gonna be extremely cushiony. So I think for you to transition then to be again with gravity, but you know, you're gonna have this sort of, I'm probably gonna bounce around a bit, and then I'm gonna be able to walk. So I kind of see now this kind of materiality of the arrival also being part of the way you're gonna design the corridors in the first step. And I know, I don't know, because I was also interested in like looking at when you were, I think someone on the question whether there is things about, you know, passports, documents, you know, what passport do I have? I'm kind of wondering that as well, like, you know, is there this also great moment of entering And I know that, like the stamp, maybe there's not going to be a stamp, but the fact that you get a stamp to have traveled to the moon, or anyway, you're going to have a document which is going to have this, okay, I need to be registered to enter anyway. So that sort of like document, whatever it's going to be, if it's going to be the same passport we have, or it's going to be a particular one, it's definitely going to be an artifact that for me, it's a main, because also that sort of will probably allow you to get into specific part of the base or not, will probably allow you to, then embark maybe on if you need to then go from that village, from that, let's say, station, you need to go to, I don't know, the southern pole, or to another place that then you need to kind of transfer to somewhere else, because even though there's going to be a let's say main village, there's still going to be micro, let's say, stations around for practical purposes on the moon. So, is that also a transitional space? Like almost like, do you have a transfer or not? I don't know. Or do you just arrive and stay there?
Sorry, currently the thought is that even well into habitats, people who go to the moon will have to have more than one skill, because there aren't enough people going to be there to do things. So people can be, technical, plus maybe like Red Cross kinds of EMS kind of people that can do minor medical things. So how people get selected is an interesting thing. So even with a couple of hundred people there, is there going to be a huge demand to go there? If we're talking about maybe 20 coming, every half year, every year. How frequently are these people going to be coming there? And are they going to be selected based on skills, based on sex, based on other criteria? So I think that's going to be a big question mark in my mind, because 20 is a very small number, right? The world has 8 billion people. We're talking in the future, it'll be 10 billion people. I would think there's going to be a lot of demand for people to go to this lunar base. So how is that going to be prescribed? How do we decide this? Is it going to be a lottery, which probably won't work, because again, we need certain mix of skills for people to go there, and governance becomes a big issue, right? Is this a democratic society? Is it sort of top-down corporate? Is it hybrid? What are the laws? If we're talking about people from all over the world, clearly different countries have different rules, different sets of norms. How do we blend all those together? Is it going to be a UN kind of activity? So there's a lot of questions that come into play when you have really a very small environment. The other thing I just want to mention is that you're on the moon, but you're never on the moon, right? You're always, either you're in the habitat or you're in a spacesuit walking around outside. I don't know how easy that's going to be to do, but you're always enclosed. You're either in a large habitat or you're in your own spacesuit habitat. So it's an interesting dynamic, just psychologically, that you're never outdoors on the moon. You always have to be protected. So there's a lot of these questions that come into being that I think the average person who thinks I'm going to go to the moon and really jump around in the sand kind of thing, it's not going to happen, right? It's at best you're going to be walking around in a spacesuit with a shovel, trying not to fall over. So anyway, just a bunch of questions really, I think, that frames what we may really experience.
Totally. I want to go back to the brief for a second and just re-articulate that, because I think it really shapes how we're conceiving of this quote unquote settlement. So I think the brief is that the Global Union in 2133 decides that a group of, around 200 people, they want more people to be living on the moon full time rather than just people coming and going and working on this solar capture project. Yes? Sitraka and Andrew, yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's the thing. So it's a population that is on the rotation, but it's like the first of a permanent settlement that incorporate family life as well. So the people working on the station also have the family there. So it needs to be thinking about extra activities, but also child rearing policies and regulations around that as well, and things of that thing sort.
Awesome. Okay, so like two things related to this. I agree with a lot of people in the chat that are talking about like not that the passport is sort of antiquated, and with to what you said, Haim, that it's more about all these departure protocols that by the time you land, I think the dream is like you go through these series of lunar texture tubes, as you're saying, Simone, but then you arrive actually into the party. Like there's no need for all of these rigor. Maybe there's a medical protocol, but there's no need for the kind of officiating because that's been done before. And I think there's a lot to be considered about the curation of who's coming and how and why. I was thinking a lot about just given capacity, and also in the desire for the settlement, we probably want groups of people to be leaving, or like is it also a goodbye party and a welcome party, and what does that do to capacity at the same time? Or is it that actually like there's kind of a leaving base where the people that are departing are sort of separated or not welcoming so that they don't contaminate? Maybe they're leaving because they've been voted off the moon, or they've requested not to go, and there's a need to like reset the vibe for the settlement, because if the mission's going great, then sure, like the transmitting of information and culture can be really helpful. But if things are kind of, let's say, polluted by like one bad denizen, then you might want them to be like departing without like, you know, having too many cocktails with the new guys.
There's just a comment in the chat like that you still have influence from Earth-based social media, and that could cause a source of disturbance, which is totally true. Which is an interesting. Sorry, go for it.
No, everyone has like every fan's following their every move as they get there.
So is this going to be like Big Brother?
Well,
Big sister.
no, but for sure there is. I mean, for sure someone is gonna live stream the whole thing. So I mean, that behavior is gonna stay.
Well, that's a good question. Maybe that shouldn't be allowed, because it's going to corrupt the whole interaction on the moon, right? If everything is going to be with social media, and people are going to be playing to the media, and there's no quicker way to corrupt an environment than just have all this bombardment of everybody's opinion on what's happening.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it may be like part of that, planetary protection, which is like you also cannot use social media as an actual kind of safety measure. I think there's like, I mean, those things are very interesting to me, as much as the interesting, like Haim, when you mentioned like, okay, you have to walk on the surface of the moon in the spacesuit, but also with a shovel because to prevent yourself from falling, and etc. But I think those details and those things, actually, this is what gives or shape the characteristic of the community. Because if suddenly if you arrive in a place, and yes, you can be, you know, as utopian as you want it to be, like, I don't know, a small commune where everyone lives in, or try to live in harmony, and etc. All the kind of safety measure that you kind of need to create in order to ensure that might become like themselves like a hard limitation that actually turn this utopia into something that isn't necessarily, when you think about it, especially from an earthbound perspective, doesn't suddenly sound like something utopian anymore. I mean, if that makes any sense what I'm saying.
I mean, like the shovel for me, I think that actually the gift bag for everyone will probably be duct tape, and you know that's the biggest sort of gift that you can give to anyone. Here is, I think it was Space Force. You know, they were all like trying to, but I think, you know, being able to fix air going out from something is probably, you know, the skill number one. And so, you know, like maybe that's what you bring up to space. You bring duct tape as a gift. You know, this is the special duct tape that we've created on, because probably you're not going to produce it there. So, you know, this is instead of flowers, you're going to have, maybe you're going to have a fruit, again, like a real fruit. Well, I mean, it's going to be real as well, but, you know, there's going to be oranges and duct tape and you're gonna give that to, it's a bit sad, but again, maybe, that's gonna be amazing.
No, but I think I just want to one thing that I read in the chat that is I think there's a link to lopping a strategy for reducing gravity human locomotion. I just wanted to point out. I can't find the link anymore, but it was an interesting comment about how you would move around the planet by around the moon by the comment was done by Sandfish. I don't know if you have the link again, but anyway, but yeah, just to keep on talking about this particular aspect, I think would be quite good to move on to the next sort of moment that we were thinking about going into, which addresses exactly what we kind of like most discussed just now with what Simone you're saying about this kind of like starter pack or gifts or things that you bring or things that are given to you in order for you to acclimatize to the environment, not only from a physical perspective or practical perspective, but also from, I don't know, a cultural standpoint, because these are the things that eventually, I don't know, you like this kind of idea of like having things that gives you an idea of what the lunar community is about, or actually the kind of community characteristics of this. I don't know, do you want to, Andrew?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so moving forwards onto the kind of arrival on the moon. So we've kind of landed, we're in the moon base in whatever form it is, and whoever's kind of running it, owning it, whatever systems are in play, a lot of interesting kind of starting points there. We wanted to kind of move towards the second part of our kind of induction to the life on the base, which is a kind of the tour. So after the excitement of landing and meeting your fellow lunar denizens, you're shown around the base. There's an air of familiarity. After all, you still need to perform many of the same jobs that you had to do on Earth, and you've been thoroughly briefed on life on Mare Nectaris and been through various simulations and safety drills prior to leaving Earth. There's something uncanny, however, about experiencing the actual base, not to mention the gravity, as we've mentioned, having a strange effect that no terrestrial simulation can quite replicate. You're shown around common spaces, the canteen, shared kitchens, food preparation areas, exercise, social areas, then into your accommodations. And the world of work can wait for tomorrow. So we'd like to kind of move the conversation on a bit now to starting to imagine and describe this tour, what the highlights are, which parts maybe leave you slightly concerned.
We were discussing, or can you mute your?
Yeah.
We were discussing some things as well. I mean, I think there were some comments about it with regard to like what kind of facilities beside, obviously, the habitat where you live and work and etc. But like maybe considering other aspects of lunar living. What kind of facilities can we think about, like kind of like common area or social areas or exercise, because eventually, I guess, I'm not 100% sure, but potentially there might be like some required physical exercise to be having. And again, the thing that we were chatting about just a minute ago, like what are these kind of like, what would be the starter pack? What's in the goodie bag when you arrive?
Along with Simone's tape.
Yeah, for sure, exactly. No, sorry, I was just thinking one thing about that as well. It's like the time that we get there. It's like, for me, it's like before we start the guided tour, what time is it? And basically there is this man, okay, now you sync your watch to whatever is the lunar time of the village. And I mean that for me, otherwise, like, I have no idea what time it is on the moon.
Maybe it's a bit like when you land somewhere and the captain says what time it is, or you're gifted a watch as soon as you arrive, perhaps in this goodie bag. I don't know, Stephanie. I noticed you were keen to jump in.
No, I'm just thinking about that perhaps there's not the same, like we don't have a watch that we have this kind of a telepathic assistant sort of in 2133 by this time. But I like this idea of time sync, and that being like a really important check-in with not only the specific minute, but also maybe the culture has developed some seasons, and we can like also the kind of weather checks of what it's like outside, and those kind of being locative ways of collective location.
One of the interesting things is that if we're still on the lunar surface, the moon has 2 weeks of daylight and 2 weeks of nighttime. So I'm assuming that we would arrive during daylight because it's just a lot easier and more pleasant. But the outside is going to be sunny for 2 weeks in a row, and then dark, totally dark for 2 weeks in a row. So I would assume that the habitat would have its own cycles of daylight and night, just to link with human rhythms, right? And so that's one thing that will take getting used to. Also, if we're on the surface, many times some of these drawings that people make about surface habitats, they make these large glass domes and large windows. So unless the technology evolves a lot in the next 100 years, we really can't have large glass domes, because sunlight coming in through those domes will basically cook everything on the inside. So that doesn't work. So maybe we'll have very advanced flat panel TV-like things that we have around the walls that appear clear, and they could basically present the image of what's beyond the wall, and that would sort of allow us to see outside without physically actually seeing outside with our own eyes. We're looking at a screen. But the other thing is that I think very quickly, or as quickly as possible, we're going to try to go underground under the surface, because under the surface you only have to go about maybe 5-10 meters under the surface when the variations in temperature become very, very minimal compared to the surface. On the surface, they're 250 degrees from daylight to nighttime. Under the surface, it's much less. The other thing is, under the surface, you're protected from a lot of the radiation, you're protected from micrometeorites. So these large lava tubes now give us a huge volume within which to build. And again, we can close off one of the lava tubes. We would have a structure under there that basically people can walk around without pressure suits all the time. So I think we have to, one of the decisions is, where will we be technologically? Probably on the surface, even 100 years from now, just because of the challenge of building. But a lot of the technology will become very robotic because astronauts cannot really build. They can't be construction workers because of the radiation temperatures, and also because the regolith, the soil on the surface of the moon, is very dangerous. We saw from the Apollo program that it gets into the astronaut suits, it gets into the mechanisms of machines. One of the big challenges of getting back to the moon is dealing with this regolith, both it being a carcinogenic and also being something that is very destructive to machines. So there's a lot of these things that are sort of hidden and will have to be worked out for these people. So this welcoming kit, I think, even though people will be trained on these issues, I think the reality of being there, I think now it's very real. And at every corner, there is something that could be fatal if they're not really careful. So I think they'll probably have a bag of tools for all the potential environments that they're going to be in. Maybe like a all-in-one screwdriver hammer kind of thing with duct tape on the end of it, to just allow them to deal with any situation for which they would have been trained.
Do one of those now.
Right, we could use one of those now. So they'll be trained in all this, but I think training is one thing, but the reality, now you're there, and you're going to be there for a long time, and you have to be somebody that not only you can protect yourself, but everybody else is counting on you to know what you're doing and help them in situations. You're part of the team all of a sudden. You're not just on your own, which is, I think, very different environment than on Earth. You can be on your own, deal with your own issues, not worry about other people. But now on the moon, you're this group, and this group is like one entity in some ways for survival.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What I found really interesting as well is like this idea that you would have. I mean, I like the idea of only looking at screens to see how the outside looks like, because as it is now today, most of the time your relationship to kind of space imagery is always like mediated through imagery and the creation of imagery and artists as well doing sort of representation of stuff that are happening very far away from here. So I find it quite interesting that you're actually on the moon, but you never actually, as you said earlier, that you never see it, and when you see it, it's a visual representation of it done by someone else, which I think that was one of the thing. And then the other aspect as well is I find interesting because obviously when you think about moon and when you think about the imagery again and the kind of like videos and photos that you see is like obviously people deambulating on the surface and etc. But I quite like as well that the reality that because that gives a very different kind of shape to the community if actually nobody is going outside and there's a kind of like almost constant fear of like dying then because everything is actually pretty designed, I mean, not designed actually for you to survive because it's like very hostile environment. So yeah, so I don't know. I mean, that's just a comment. I don't necessarily have a particular question around this, but perhaps in terms of like activities that you would do then so there's no sort of like outdoor activities as such. There's no kind of stroll to go and check out the Earth crescent, all that thing that looks pretty interesting from an earthbound person's perspective.
Yeah, I don't want to make it seem so dismal. I think that because of the environment being so serious, right? Serious environment, all these things have to be tabulated. Like, for example, you can still go out on a stroll on the lunar surface, but you're going to have to count the REM dosage from the radiation, and the human body can only accept a certain amount per year according to certain rules. So that's part of that. So it's like not eating too much food because you're counting calories. There you're counting radiation dosage. So you know how much time you can go strolling on the surface of the moon. So that's one, it's sort of a weird thing to think about, but that's one reality that you have there.
Sorry, didn't want to interrupt you.
No, I was just gonna say there's gonna be a proliferation of warning signs in space. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of work for graphic designers, just all the things that will go wrong. Like, okay, this door, no, it's but no, yeah, actually, I think that becomes interesting though when you have. I think someone brought, a Geiger counter in the welcoming kit, but these all things about how do you turn all these like safety measures into something that becomes, the normality as well. Like you need to fix stuff, you need to know how much radiation you have. I mean, it's basically the lunar Fitbit. You have a radiation counter. It's going to be also more normal. So you get your watch with Fitbit, you get duct tape with a hammer multi-head. Do we get, actually, I was thinking about language as well, like being a very international sort of potential community, maybe there is a sort of jargon or like lunar vernacular manual, or like, how do people call things at that point, which are probably different and are probably coming from different languages. So it's almost like I would like to have, almost like this mini, you're gonna have a map probably with like, how people call things, because we don't call it the dock, they call it the plaza or the something else. And so I guess some sort of, like a phrase book of sorts. I think that could be an interesting other.
Like all the space jargon, right? All the acronyms that don't mean anything, but they're like 15 words into 3 letters kind of thing. And that's how people are going to talk with acronyms.
Exactly. I think we should start working on this. That would be quite an interesting brief. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. One thing that you mentioned now, I completely forgot now, which the idea of building around the safety protocols to actually bring things back to normal. But oh yeah, so this is the thing. Basically, if you have a certain amount of radiation that you can take per year and etc., this might be. And I mean, it's interesting to see how you can build your entire sort of like not necessarily economy, but like how like, could this be the core thing from which like services and ways of interactions with the lunar base and interaction between people actually is based on, in the sense that you can't actually go for, I mean, you need to go for strolls every once in a while to get a little bit of kind of like, I don't know, of like the idea of vacation within your very long work week or something. But at the same time, you need to keep some to be able to go and actually do some work. So it's it becomes some sort of like gauge that is constantly kind of a sort of like reminder of your different type of activities, and like basically from which like regulations can emanate in different ways, from leisure to actual work activity and etc. I thought this was a very interesting point.
Yeah, I would add also that even that comment that I made about the radiation is our current understanding, but there's a lot of research in genetic engineering, gene therapy, and there's research, we're understanding more and more how radiation affects our cells and our genetic makeup. And maybe in 100 years, we'll be able to be genetically engineered to withstand, because there are certain animals and like, I forgot the name of it, some of these microscopic bacteria size creatures that can survive in vacuum, in radiation, nothing happens to them. And maybe it'll be possible to prepare, the next 20 people that go to the moon, prepare them genetically to be more withstanding to radiation. So maybe it won't be as bad as I made it out to be.
That leads nicely on from one of the comments in the chat there about the development in the.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. The development in the engineering side of everything, and the idea that perhaps, as you say, like in 100, 200 years time, we have developed new materials and new ways of, I don't know, creating new kinds of apparel design that allow you to go for, as Sitraka says, your nightly, every 2 weeks, nightly lunar stroll, or kind of that leads to whole new ways of thinking and relating to the environment.
Stephanie, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I was going to say that my favorite part of the welcome tour is when they open the door to that closet full of like little gadgets and bits and bobs for fixing stuff. That, I mean, maybe that's also part of what you need to bring along with your duct tape and your Swiss Army thing, is also just like all these gadgets for fixing the machines, as Fred is talking about. But that room is super exciting and full of all kinds of materials. The other thing I was thinking is that maybe part of the anti-radiation is actually some kind of medicine. So it's something that we ingest that changes our biochemistry in such a way that has other secondary effects that might contribute to the party and make it weirder, or might make it harder to do other kinds of things.
So being Italian, I will have to introduce this topic now after the fixing, which is really important to me, which is gonna be food. Because you said we're gonna go through the the mensa or like the sort of thing, and it's like, and I'm just wondering whether in this situation, whether we're gonna have to have people understand that they're gonna eat very similar things for a very long time, or by, because I don't know, I was talking to some people from JPL, and they would say, the thing that astronauts will have to understand is that they're gonna have to eat potatoes in many different ways, and it's gonna be mostly potato. So I'm kind of wondering also this moment of like, going to the mensa, is there gonna be, oh, like I'm gonna show you that we have great food here, so you're gonna be happy about it, or I'm gonna just make it very clear that it's gonna be the same thing, but it's amazing because of that. I don't know, will we have a space chef, or will you have a taste of your first, even that in the part, in the sort of like the tour, I think it will be, like I said it before, but tasting the first lunar or asteroid filtered water, like that we capture because that's another source, interesting source, that's kind of water coming from a specific asteroid. Is it, it's a special moment, or also like what's going to be the first snack? Is it going to be a spirulina based something? Is it going to be, whatever, like a a particular snack, which is something that all astronauts eat. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I quite like the idea of having a water sommelier on the lunar station, who knows exactly how the waters got filtered. Different part of the station may have different type of water taste and everything. And also because obviously the other thing is like food is a massive, in terms of ritual, is massive important, or at least for now, maybe it isn't in the 22nd century, and nobody actually have this kind of communal ritual as eating together. But it's an interesting thing to think about the canteen, or other stuff such as I don't know, the coffee, or I'm saying coffee because it's just like if there was no coffee, at least in the way we're thinking about it, or I'm thinking about it here, it would be that is part of my ritual in the morning, etc. What would be the equivalent, or how you could sort of create the equivalent in terms of experience would be an interesting thing to think about it as well. Not necessarily duplicating or replicating, what happens on Earth, but what would be the creation of something similar to that particular ritual? And unless anyone's got a particular comment on this, we're just going to move, because I think it's kind of it's a good leeway into the next and the final bits. And I think the final moment that we wanted you to look into, and I think it was also has a lot of things to do with what Haim was talking about as well earlier, about this kind of and what Stephanie you touched upon as well, about this kind of genetic engineering, as well as eventually taking medicine that influence your behavior in some ways as well. And I'm saying it's the last part, but I mean, they're all kind of connected together. So feel free. I know that we have a roadmap, but feel free to move up and down any direction. It's totally fine. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I think that leads quite nicely into the next stage that we wanted to look into, which was your first assignment. And when you start your kind of actual work, when you start employing your screwdriver, hammer, duct tape, multi-tool. So thankfully, being on the moon's not affected your morning routine, apart from the fact that perhaps it's once every 2 weeks, but we'll kind of gloss over that for now. Still starting the day with a strong black coffee and a light breakfast. And then after what somewhat unusual but comfortable night's sleep, it's time to report for work for your first day. It's important to remember that this is the purpose of your being here. It's not only to experience life on an extraterrestrial body, the joy of a lunar cocktail or two in the shade of the base's structure. Along with your work, there are additional duties that each resident on the base must perform in order to ensure the safe and successful day-to-day operation of the facility. You're given a choice of options based on your profile and the vacancies created by the last departing group. These tasks must be performed above all other duties, professional or personal, as they're key to sustaining life on the base. Then it's time to start your shift. So really now we'd like to look a little bit about what these tasks might be, how roles are kind of delegated, the division of labor, how we might try and create some kind of work-life balance. I know there've been a lot of comments on the chat about the different kind of governance systems on the base and how different hierarchies might kind of evolve. Also the use of automation and robotics and the people being there to service those. I'd like to dig into a little bit more these kind of relationships and still thinking about the kind of things, the objects, the artifacts, the items that might kind of characterize these moments in these stories.
Okay. I mean, I think probably as a first task, it would be good to do something that is not very dangerous to yourself. I mean, it depends, of course, I guess, depending on the level of how professional you are, but I almost feel that there should almost be like a sandbox space where I can actually try, basically as a lunar citizen, I should be able to do, I don't know, 5 things in order to keep myself safe and keep everyone else safe, so I should be able to, fix air, understand basics of tubes and fixing tubes of air or liquid of sorts. be able to remotely control a robot. I mean, like we were saying in the chat, I think one of the things that people will do is basically control that robots are doing the right thing or manually override specific actions. So I almost feel like the first task is it's this sort of like lunar license to then get a task. So, you know, it's almost like I have these 5 situations that I need to solve, and that's kind of my, you know, and I do it in a safe way, in a sort of like simulated virtual environment where I get this. I would probably do the same back on Earth, but actually doing it on the moon has more relevance because you're actually, you know, in the same situation.
A bit like getting your forklift truck license before you start working in the warehouse.
Yeah,
Cutting
yeah,
or whatever.
I think that would be safe to do before you actually get a task.
Stephanie?
Well, I just want to question this task shift model. In Bogdanov's Red Planet, there's this, it always really struck me that there's just this kind of like list of jobs basically, and everyone can decide how often they want to work and how much and when they don't want to work. And it's this kind of, I mean, it relies on a certain kind of critical mass, but I think we could calibrate it enough that if there's the right culture around the mission, then you can actually kind of allow people to either zero in and focus as they wish on a particular task, or like opt out according to the rhythms that they have, and that we might be able to choreograph this in a more dynamic way with our intelligence tools. Yeah, Red Star, thanks.
I guess depends how all the tasks that need to take place on this facility are covered by a couple of hundred people. If everybody has a task, then everybody has to work. But maybe the whole 200 don't have to work all the time. Maybe it's only 150. I would think though that as a new person on the moon, I might become an apprentice for somebody who's doing something that I'm supposed to be doing, because I would assume that any task would require at least some redundancy. So at least 2 people working on it, maybe 3 people who have that expertise. And so the new person comes in, maybe one of the others who's been there for 6 months or a year or whatever the cycling time is leaving. So there'll be an overlap so that, you know, one can learn the practicalities of that task. So I would think an apprentice system, a limited one, of course, might be a model that might work.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's quite. I mean, that's pretty good. It's as if like we start having some sort of an idea a little bit of how these kind of like relationship between new members and members who've been there for a while, and it's kind of like this sort of like apprenticeship goes as well beyond potentially the tasks themselves, and is also about like the know-how, but also the passing on of the culture itself, perhaps. So a little bit like, I don't know, the folklore where like you pass on stories, but pass on songs as well. Lunar shanties and that kind of thing could be an interesting thing. Sorry,
I was just thinking now on that, like a bit like the Olympic village, that everyone then gets you know, the Olympic tattoo. That probably there is gonna be, you know, the lunar tattoo is gonna be this thing that, oh, everyone that got to the moon, and you know, like instead of the 5 rings. No, but that I actually like that the concept of like kind of redundancy based culture, that actually you create this like potentially random like partnerships or also with people, but that creates that sort of you know, kind of passing on of knowledge, and I guess also probably passing off of things, because it might not be possible for you to bring back, you know, any of your tools, because, you know, probably payload and cost of bringing new stuff, it's going to have that things are going to be shared for, I don't know, 6, 7 iterations of lunar citizens. So maybe even the objects themselves will have some sort of footprint and history in themselves for who use it. I don't know. I mean, it can be like something very analog, like, you know, you have speakers, or also in the space station, you have this sort of people leaving things as memory. But I think in this case will be expanded to the infinite, where, you know, this was, you know, the fixing tool from this guy that was from the first generation of Denizen and of citizens, and, you know, you see that was his name, and it was, you know, 25 years ago, and maybe you can even somehow embed the knowledge. So maybe actually the knowledge of the usage is embedded in the tool. Anyway, like that, kind of more like the machine learning to the extreme in 100 years.
Right, like artificial intelligence, right? The tool evolves because of the user. Yeah, the other question I wanted to bring up, which I guess is sort of obvious, but you know, just what about interpersonal relationships? Like, we have 200 people. Are we going to only have? Are we going to have a certain blend for a dynamic? Are we going to allow? I mean, I don't know how you don't allow, but are there going to be social interactions? You know, are couples going to be a preferred mode? I know that there've been some studies, for example, for trips to Mars, they say that all women crews are the optimal mix. So what happens with this facility, right? We're putting people somewhere for 6 months to a year before they cycle back, or even longer. What are the rules of engagement, so to speak? Like what is allowed, what is not allowed? So, you know, sometimes the most complicated thing are how humans interact with each other, right? If they don't interact well, as I think Stephanie mentioned at the beginning, maybe there's one person who's a real troublemaker. You want to cycle him back home as soon as possible, but you can't cycle him back immediately, right? So, and it's never going to be 1 out of 200. You know, people have different personalities, and I know there's going to be a selection process, you know, like they do with astronauts. But like, what is allowed? You know, are we going to talk? I mean, do we do anything about that? Do we? Can we really control that? And that's sort of a random component in all this, you know, just interaction of people. And I think many times, you know, that all the people that end up on the moon at time t equal to 0, they're all perfect, you know, well balanced and everything. But now, you know, a month later, 2 months later, this environment can affect different people differently. And some take it greatly, and others may have a problem. And then just again, just the human interaction, you know, individual to individual, whether romantic or otherwise, I think is sort of a critical thing in all this and how it works.
Yeah,
I mean, oh, sorry, go for it.
Well, just in preparing for this session, I was just looking into moon sex, which NASA kind of has no position on, and I guess the Soviet researchers had a little bit more position on, but it kind of blew my mind that desire, or like gravity, is desire on some dimension, and that like that there might be like a really much better egalitarian and kind of working dynamic without all this gravity causing all sorts of complications in our society. Could be good.
Yeah, these are like really all good points, actually. Like these because clearly, I mean, clearly the environment will have an impact on, I mean, I don't have a particular answer to any of these questions, but clearly the environment has going to have a particular impact on the way people behave and relate to each other. And the idea of like these, I mean, this is something that we eventually discussed a little bit, like how do you regulate, I mean, in the last conversation, how do you regulate, or do you need to regulate, or is it, you know, how the regulation of people's relation and people's interactions. This is something quite interesting in general, and that probably gives this kind of dynamic to the whole, or characterize actually the settlement itself in terms of dynamic and relation and culture and everything.
I think some of the things here offer up some interesting potentials to think about things in a slightly different way as well. I mean, I was kind of joking in the chat when I said lock them in the brig, and then the idea of prison moons and penitentiaries kind of come up as a way of kind of managing people who are maybe troublemakers, if you say, or you want to get them off the base or whatever. A rethinking of how we rehabilitate people or kind of integrate people and diffuse situations is actually is an area where some kind of developments here could be made in a kind of the way we manage people, I suppose, and the way we manage people's psychology in new ways, which we can start thinking about today and start to implement and start to work with. So I think that's a really interesting area for further development.
I mean, there's definitely going to be like stress relief rooms. Like I can imagine in this space there should be somewhere where I can, you know, because there also lower gravity or something where I can throw something very far just to, you know, diffuse my energy, or you know, kind of creative ways of combining physical exercise and stress relief in sorts. I think in that as well, like it's probably gonna I don't know, because we didn't speak too much about that, about the whole physical activity and sport, but I think that other part of if some of these chores are actually, I mean, if a lot of the work is going to be mostly like monitoring, like if we imagine that most of the activities are performed by, you know, autonomous swarm of robots to build things or to fix things outside, then actually a lot of the chores might be kind of sitting behind an interface to control that things are actually happening. So then we need to, on the other hand, create this other set of like activity and community and, you know, sports or hobbies to actually make, you know, because having also lower gravity, you probably have to have more physical activity. I mean, it's not like the zero gravity problem, but still, you know, you have to keep your and so then, yeah, like in what are the kind of, beside the chore, also the hobbies that you might want to, I mean, are there I don't know, clubs that I can sign up to? Like, can I, you know, is there like the
nightclub that goes on for 2 weeks?
That for sure. But the clubs I meant were more like, I don't know, like a DIY. Is there like, I don't know, solar panel pottery club, or, you know, like the DIY? Probably there's going to be regolith pottery, or I don't know, some sort of things that you can do, an activity that are very like lunar, kind of lunar-based culture. What's that?
Rock climbing.
For sure. Yes.
Real power moves. I think that's a really important thing as well. If we think about this being life full time on the base, this kind of, I suppose, downtime, the kind of work-life balance, and how that actually helps improve and make our actual work way more productive, as well as our social interactions. And there will be a call for this to be explored in some way, for sure.
Hi, I mean, I thought Haim was talking and was on mute, but maybe I misread.
Yeah, so I was going to say that there are designs being developed for pressurized rovers that basically act as temporary habitats. And so I would think 100 years from now, those kind of rovers would be at the facility on the moon where, you know, 3, 4, 5 people can go on a multi-day or week expedition somewhere. And certainly lunar geology, you know, picking up rocks and exploring could be a great hobby as well as a scientific endeavor.
Some of these ideas as well, the idea of going for a weekend on your rover with a couple of friends to another side of the moon, I mean, great. And it kind of ties in with some of the ideas, like bringing mementos back, bringing things back from our trips, traces, and things that maybe, I think, Simona, you mentioned on the ISS, the kind of people putting pictures up and things like leaving traces of themselves as well. This is an area that maybe we haven't really looked at so much. We've been very focused on the kind of some of the technical realities of life on the base and the pragmatics of working and performing our tasks, doing our duties, getting the job done. But there's the very human side as well of wanting to play, wanting to kind of bring things that remind us of home, remind us of other people, tell other people about us through the kind of clothes we wear to this opening party or whatever, these kind of sides of things, which maybe it's worth, or it would be nice to have a little bit of a kind of think about some of these things, these kind of more human, maybe more whimsical perhaps, but they're actually not really whimsical, because they're something that we engage with all the time now, that we would, things that maybe we would like to take with us up there, or rituals, actions, things like that.
Okay, we go. Is there is a, no, but I mean, yeah, for sure. Like, I think almost like on the living, there should be, because we said, I mean, there was this scenario of these poor 20 people living that they've been ostracized because other people didn't like them. But I also imagine there could be just like a very normal sort of like shift of people, and on the living, there is also like you leaving part of you to the, you know, to the station. So I mean, whether it's a photo of an object, or whether there is something else that almost like, I mean, I kind of like the idea of having almost like someone was talking about the village and the moon ecosystem being like an organism itself. But I also imagine, like, if I can donate, or somehow part of like my microbiome, for instance, as part of like, this is how, after 1 year, this is like, I'm actually donating a sample to create like a new sort of lunar microbiome, which is the total of all the people that have been there, which maybe are gonna help, I don't know, solve you know, kind of new challenges there. But I can imagine wanting to leave like something there of my presence, but at the same time, as you say, bringing bringing a bit of regolith, like, you know, the typical, like, the sand in a I don't know. I also feel like there is always this thing that, you know, 100 years from now, you think that things are going to be different, but I think that simple human emotion of having a bit of sand of the moon in something, it's not going to change, you know, like that simple memento, or
Like
whether it's
having a fragment of the Berlin Wall.
I mean, it's
that kind of souvenir.
that kind of souvenir. I think there's going to be something like that, or whether it's like a regular 3D printed, you know, miniature of the moon. I mean, that there is going to be someone in the base that is going to create maybe that business internally, and it's going to be like like a semi-legal business of selling pieces of the moon to bring back, if it's not possible.
This kind of thing that could be in the corner of the piazza when you undock from your ship. That kind of, I can imagine that kind of stall there with the guy.
Yeah, there is a guy in the corner that, you know, if you want some regolith to bring, you know, I can hook you up. I mean, that
I'm super worried about this from a planetary protocol perspective. Like, I think this souvenir mentality is the exact thing that we should be trying to break on this settlement. Like, I'm all for, like, I maybe hope that part of the, I don't know, there's been some good debate in the chat about screening and who gets to go and why, but I think given the mission that there will need to be some sort of curation based on skills and attitude and aptitude and all of that. And I guess that part of this should be, I don't know, that I call into question that it's like human nature to need to take things with us, and that we can kind of develop other models for like memory making and leaving behind that are more about carving or information or stitching or like thing, like it's not about taking things at all, or like I think fresh fruit makes sense, and like the tools stuff, but there's something to me about the kind of object fetish. I'd rather have like the simulation. Like, I had a moon rock as a kid. I'm sure it didn't come from the moon, and that was perfectly fine.
I don't know, but I agree with you. I think that's something that shouldn't exist, but I think there's gonna be a black market for that for sure. Like, I mean, like, we shouldn't enforce it, but someone will for sure make that happen in some way. Moon NFTs, yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about, like, when you were talking about that radiation economy, Citraka, I was thinking about like the radiation coin, kind of like a reverse carbon economy issue.
Yeah, I'm looking at just Yeah, but by the time NFT anyway as an acronym would mean something completely different in our phrase book. For the, I mean, because we almost are at the end of our, I mean, it's been very short and etc. But I was thinking for the last 5 minutes, maybe we could, I don't know, try to think about what would be like, what would be a lunar party like? Because obviously it's called the welcoming party, and we haven't actually discussed directly what a party would be like. And I don't know if any of you's got like particular I don't know, ideas about what you would need or what you could actually do because you're on the moon that you can't do on Earth, etc. And I'm not necessarily only talking about moonshine on the moon and stuff like that. I think you mute Haim or Stephanie if you want to start.
Yeah, Caitlin makes an interesting point about music on the moon, whether music developed on the moon would be characteristically different than what we see, what we hear on Earth. And that would be an interesting thing, right? People, people play instruments and guitars and other instruments. Maybe different kinds of instruments would be developed on the moon. Maybe you have a lunar band of some sort, and that would be an interesting way to, they would play for all the new arrivals. Every time we have a new team come in, they'll have a song welcoming them to the moon with the latest lunar sound.
I just wanted to mention, do you want to say something, Simon? No, you don't want to. No, I just wanted to mention that we have in the audience as well, Sans Fish, who actually worked on a instrument called the telemetron, which is an instrument that's been designed to be only played in 0G. So just to say that you would need to design another one so it can be played with the gravity that is on the moon. So you never know what it sounds like, but you hear stories about it.
But no, on that, I think for sure, I think the probably part of this program, hopefully there is going to be people that are, also developing music and art and like some sort of like residence. And I can imagine definitely like also a mix of, lunar based music, a particular lunar drink, which I don't know yet, but it's definitely going to be, you guys made the moonshine, but something like that. And also, as you have 2 weeks of, as we said before, as you have 2 weeks of night, maybe it's a very long party. Yeah. If it's a going away party, then definitely it's going to be a long one, but
a 2 weeks long one.
Yeah, I hope that the culture of the settlement also like eliminates that awkward thing of introductions that we find some at a party, like there's some interface or it's just kind of like protocol that it's easy to introduce to a stranger, know someone's name before you know them, etc. Maybe you can send them thoughts before you even say something to them.
Yeah, I think this is interesting, like thinking about this entire relationship, not only like completely separated, but obviously because it's not as if the Earth wasn't going anywhere. So yeah, so totally. As part of the ritual actually should kind of take in consideration, as we were mentioning actually at the very beginning, the departure and things that you do on Earth already and things that you do in anticipation. Does anyone else have another particular thing that they wanted to talk about more particularly that we didn't have time to talk about? Like something that you really wanted to talk about and that actually didn't mention?
No, I think at a certain point there was also written somewhere about pets and bringing pets, and basically the whole thing which is going to be probably for maybe the next episode, if we talk about the actual daily life, whether someone will actually be able to bring a pet or whether the pet is, I mean, if the animal is also something that you inherit from the previous person, which I think is also interesting, whether, rather than bringing animals up and down. It's probably just I kind of have, I don't know, this kind of the village pet.
You have the pet robot.
Yeah, and I think, or probably like the I think there was a Fred Sharman that was also in the chat. I think I love his non-human autonomous space agency. So it probably should be a dugong or something something else than a dog.
I guess I mean, it's similar to pets, but bringing the children along. I think there's lots of questions about whether reproduction can happen in space at all. But I think even the prospect of thinking about children raises the question about like generations and all kinds of ages in space and ability, like who's allowed to come and how diverse is our spectrum of participants, not only from in race and from country as we've been talking about, but across this other spectrum. And I think that relates to these questions about how family life might be different. And the hope in my mind that like maybe the older kids raise and watch the younger kids, etc. And there's sort of like more of a kibbutz model here in terms of child care and parenting.
I'm also curious if 100 years from now, whether we also have a colony on Mars. You know, the plan is the moon to inhabit and develop a lot of the technology, and then go from the moon to Mars with a similar process of extending to Mars. So I wonder how the dynamic on a lunar facility would be if there was also a Martian facility and there was traffic back and forth between Mars and the moon as well, how that would alter all the dynamics.
Well, these are, do you want to say something, Simone? I saw you.
No, I just because I love the idea of a lunar kindergarten, just like the image of, you know, entering, there is this lunar kindergarten and there are kids that are playing probably with all the rovers that, you know, this means, because they're gonna have to learn. Actually, there should be a whole episode about what is education of a kindergarten in space. I mean, do you need to learn history, or do you need to learn, you know, the basics of circularity, circular system, you know, and when do you introduce when? So even the toys should be completely different, because, you know, if I don't know, it's okay, maybe we do another, maybe we should do a project about this. Anyway,
maybe we should extend. We stay two more hours. No.
Yeah, guys, everyone around listening, you know, it's Friday, so we can stay.
Exactly. Nobody needs to do anything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to, because we close. I mean, we very close to the end, and I just want to just mention as well that before anyone leaves, I would recommend everyone to actually take a screenshot of the take a screenshot, or like just copy and paste the chat, because I think there's a lot of interesting resources and lots of interesting comments, and there's a lot of things that we wanted to address that we didn't, because the topic is way too big to be obviously discussed within the same amount. I mean, these 2 hours and etc. But I want to say that I'm already very pleased with all the things that we managed to discuss today. I personally didn't feel like it was 2 hours, and I could keep on going. So I definitely, like I said last time, I definitely think this is something that we should do again, more of. All that to say that I don't know if Nick, you want to do that, but like just want to tell. I mean, I don't know if you have a link now, but basically the next event is going to be called Moonlife. We have another set of guests as well. So Nick just like, Colin just pasted the link of the event into the chat. So for everyone who's here in the audience and also the guests, I mean, hi, Stephanie and Simone, if you want to join again next time around to talk about Moonlife. I think these conversations are really amazing, and I really enjoy this kind of dynamic. And thank you again for coming and participating. Thanks again to NSPDOS for organizing this thing. And thanks again for Caitlin to actually co-host as well. I mean, the Santa Fe Institute InterPlanetary project to co-host this series. It's just gonna be good. It is good. It's just gonna keep on being good. Do you have a last word, Andrew?
I mean, it's just going to keep on being good. So thanks everybody for the engagement in the chat as well. There's some really interesting points, and it's going to be great to download that afterwards and really dig into some of the themes and the links that people have posted. So as Citrak said, it's a great resource there.
Yeah,
Thanks
I had
very
to
much,
say
everybody.
that there was so much pressure on us with the chat. They were so fast at topics. I was, oh my God, like, yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks, everybody. And with that, have a good rest of your day. Good weekend. See you in a few weeks for Lunar Denizens Moon Month. Take care.
Bye-bye.
That was pretty good.
I could stay too. We have to stop.